Oh, okay. So, Colleen, thanks for joining me this morning. This morning we're going to do a short interview. You're a member of our alumni. You graduated in 2017 from
Yes.
our MSc in Finance. And so, as you were explaining to me, or as I've known for a while, you're working in aviation leasing. So, I think it would be really interesting for the new intake of students to get an understanding of what you do in your current job. So maybe we could start there. You can tell us a little bit about the aviation industry and your experience of working in it for the last, what, year and a half now? Is it 2 years, maybe even?
3 years. I just hit 3 years.
Oh,
Because
gosh.
yeah, I started doing an internship actually while I was writing my dissertation, so I covered a lot of ground at the start.
Wow, 3 years. It's amazing. So tell us a little bit about your experience of aviation leasing, just generally speaking. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I had actually never heard of aviation leasing, aircraft finance until I came here to do the master's at Trinity. And it was actually through a graduate open evening that was arranged through the career department that I discovered the industry in general. And once I started to look into it, I realized that it was an industry that was very Irish because the industry had really been founded in Ireland probably about 30 or 40 years ago. But at the same time, it was extremely international because it involved working with banks and airlines and owners and people all over the world, truly. So it offered me the chance to really kind of get involved in an industry in my new country, while at the same time still maintaining a vast internationalism that I was looking for in my career. And the industry is based on this idea that airlines don't necessarily want to own these very expensive assets, that it might be easier for them to simply rent them on long-term leases, so for maybe 6 to 12 years, and that can help them with their cash flow planning and their balance sheet management as well. So that's the idea. You have tons of aircraft lessors based in Dublin. All of them would own a portfolio of aircraft that are rented out to airlines all over the world. And there are so many different careers that one can have within aircraft leasing. So there are people who work on the technical side, more of the engineering, that they're actually working with the aircraft themselves. But then you also have people who are working more in a commercial capacity, talking with airlines every day, talking with other lessors about buying and selling. You have people like myself who are working in corporate planning, managing relationship with banks, maybe with joint venture partners or asset owners who might want to just have this as an investment and not necessarily want to manage it themselves. And then, of course, there's the accounting and finance people, the treasury people. There's the asset management people who usually have kind of a business or accounting background and would do more of the day-to-day management of keeping track of the how well the airline lessee is holding to the lease. So there's a lot of different ways to get involved in this industry, I have to say.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. And um, I mean, I suppose there was the option of, after you qualified, of going to, say, the big four, the big kind of accounting firms, or into, say, industry, or so there was lots of options open to you. But aviation leasing, what was it that kind of really kind of sold it for you? Because a lot of students over the last couple of years will go to the big four, but I think it's really good that they're aware that there's so many options beyond that.
Mhm.
So what was it that kind of brought you to aviation leasing over, say, big four accounting firms or maybe another
Mhm.
industry company?
Yeah, I think that it was the truly like the idea of airplanes is very exciting. Like to me, it's such an interesting industry. I love learning about the aircraft themselves. I love being able to speak with banks and lessees all over the world. Like my job sometimes feels like it is 24/7 because there are emails coming in from Japan in the morning and emails coming in from San Francisco at night, talking to people all over the world in between. I think that there's something very exciting about that, and knowing that this is kind of it's a niche industry, which I think is interesting to me. I was very lucky in that I found an industry that I could be excited about very quickly. I think that going into one of the big four is a good option to get your training, get your qualifications, especially if maybe you're not sure where exactly you'd like to take your skill set. A lot of my coworkers today actually came from the Big Four. So they did their qualifications and training and then moved into aircraft leasing. I just happened to be lucky enough to find aircraft leasing early on in my education and realize that's what I was interested in. And then, being able to find a graduate program that allowed me the chance to try it out, which was very good. I know that there are a lot of graduate programs that let you do rotations around the company so you can feel which of the areas that I talked about earlier were best, or ones that give you an opportunity to just see if it's for you. And I found that very appealing because my graduate program was only a year, so I knew that like within a year I could have an idea of where my career was going, and so that was also something that spoke to me at that time.
Okay, that's interesting. And could you tell us just briefly what a typical day might look like for you, just so the students can kind of go, well, what does a typical day look like in aviation leasing? How would you describe it briefly?
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose I should preface this by saying that when I first started my career, I was working in our commercial team, and so I had a very active role in our buying and selling of aircraft. So that kind of a day in that life looked very different from what I do now, where I'm in corporate planning and investment. But I can give you an idea of both days. I think that might be helpful. I think it's interesting. They're quite
Yeah,
different.
absolutely. Yeah.
So, when I worked on our commercial team, I was mostly focused on our acquisitions of aircraft, and then also on some of our sales to more particular investors. So a day in the life might involve meeting up with a deal team. So that would be kind of a cross-sectional team with one member from each team in the company who are all focusing on a single transaction. So we might meet up together to discuss a particular aspect of the deal. We might review legal documents together, and everybody would feed in with their particular expertise on that legal document. And we have a lot of company meetings and team meetings. So we might go on to a company meeting later, and if there was a particular point that we weren't clear on, we might talk with our senior management team about it to get some direction. There would be lots of phone calls with the counterparty, maybe with the counterparty's legal counsel, kind of discussing different legal documents. And then if it was coming close to a closing where the money and the aircraft would be exchanged, there'd be a lot of discussion surrounding that and making sure that the various teams, whether it's within the other company who's making the payment to us or we're making the payment to them, that's all arranged and the numbers add up together. So I guess the thing to emphasize about that, it's a very, very team oriented and very discussion based kind of meetings focused day every day, because the communication has to be flowing not only within your own company amongst all the teams, but also between your company and the counterparty's company as well, to make sure that the transaction goes smoothly and that all the information, all the documents that need to be exchanged are on a timely manner, because you would be trying to close a transaction by a certain date. These days, my job is a little bit different. In corporate planning and investment, we would be responsible for a few different areas. One of the things that I look after would be looking at some of our financing. So I might get emails from various banks that we work with to stay up to date on market trends, or might have calls with the banks where they would share some of their insights in the market. And then myself and my colleagues would in turn talk about things that we're seeing in the market as well. If there were opportunities that we were looking for where we needed financing for particular aircraft or portfolios, we might be having discussions along those lines with banks. I'd be working with colleagues internally who would do more of a pricing function and might be making specific models and talking with them about what works best. And then also kind of just day-to-day management of the financing, because when you have financed a portfolio of aircraft, there are a lot of covenants that you have to hold to that require ongoing maintenance or ongoing reporting. So looking after that. There's also aspects of financial planning involved that come around once or twice a month. So looking at forecasts and working with our senior management team to get their ideas of kind of where the business is headed and how we should reflect that in forecasting. And then also looking at new business opportunities as well. So if there was ever an opportunity to partner up with another company to maybe form a joint venture, or like I mentioned earlier, if they were aircraft owners who wanted to own the asset just really as an investment, but they didn't want to manage the day-to-day of it, a company like the one that I work for would be the one who comes in and manages the day-to-day. So we'd be talking with investors about that and trying to get them to sign up with us. So a lot of things happen. I think, as you can see, there's so much going on, and that's really one of the things that appealed to me about this industry is that there was always something different to be working on, always new people to be talking to. Just such a dynamic and growing industry as well. That's the idea that no 2 days would ever be the same was very appealing to me. And as you can tell, there's a
Yeah, I
lot.
can tell it. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
Um, and so, looking at the students as they come into their year at their masters, what advice would you give to them? In terms of doing their career exploration, what did you learn? Like, what would you have done differently, or what did you do well? Were you sort of job hunting from the moment you began in Trinity? Do you think that's a good idea? What was your strategy, and what did you learn from that?
Yeah, I guess that's a really interesting question that I haven't thought too much about before. But you're right, I was job hunting from the moment I got to Trinity, and it was kind of unfortunate because I suppose I make it sound like I found aircraft leasing and just went with it, and that's what I did. But the reality of it is I thought that this might be an interesting industry to work with, but I wasn't sure if I could get a job. Just because who knows the way the world works. So I did a lot of research into a lot of different areas, did so many interviews, applied with multiple companies, and I think the to answer that question, information is never a bad thing. So I would advise students to just get as much information as they can, any way they can, to talk to different people, to attend all of the different career seminars, to do as much research as possible, to email people if there are questions, and really to just look and see and keep an open mind, even if you think, okay, what little I know about this particular area of the industry doesn't seem like something for me. We'll just do a little more research and maybe ask somebody who's in it to see if there's some component of it that might interest you, because that might actually end up being the area that you'd like to go into once you have more knowledge of it.
Yeah, so you're raising a really good point there. Like, knowledge is power. So by sending a CV, you learn something. By going to an interview, you learn something. It's all about information collection. So I agree with you on that. And the actual, from your experience of interviewing, if you can cast your mind back that far, what was it? What advice would you have for students when they're going to interviews? Anything that you'd take out of that you'd share with them?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I always try to keep in mind is that the people who I'm interviewing with might not necessarily be familiar with the particular aspects of my experience. So they might not be familiar with some of the acronyms that I'm using, or they might not be understand the significance of some of my accomplishments. So when I was interviewing, I always tried to be very, very clear and lay out exactly why my accomplishments, why my qualifications were so impressive. And I think that was especially significant coming from an international background, because people wouldn't necessarily be familiar with my U.S. university. They might not be familiar with some of the experience that I had back in the U.S. And even at Trinity, like I was part of the student managed fund, and I couldn't just say, oh, I'm in SMF, because people who are interviewing me might not know what that is. But it was a good accomplishment to be in the student managed fund. So, yeah, I suppose my advice would be just to make sure that you're really bragging about yourself and being very clear on your accomplishments and why they're so significant.
Excellent. Okay. Um, One more question that I have is actually, being an international student coming here. You were working on the stamp 1G for the first 2 years. Is that correct?
For the first year, actually.
First year. That's right. The first year. And then tell us a little bit about what happened after that.
Yeah, so I was on the Stamp 1G, which I got, shortly after beginning my graduate program. And the idea with the graduate program, as with most graduate programs, is it's a chance for you to feel out the company and for the company to feel you out and see if you're a good match for each other. And so, coming up to the end of my graduate program, the company and I decided that we were a good fit. And so at that point, the company decided to transition me onto a critical skills permit, or rather, they told me they were going to put me on a work permit, and then I said I would like a critical skills permit. So we had a conversation about how to make sure that that was the one that I fell under. And looking at my qualifications and my experience, it was pretty straightforward to say, yes, I would fall under a critical skills. And I think that's probably the case for most people getting the MSc in finance. Because I think there's a particular area, or at least when I was going through the process, there was
Yeah.
where you could put that in. And then, we just talked about how I've been here for 3 years. I actually just got an email last week that I have gotten my stamp 4. So next
Nice.
stage, here I am.
Wow. Okay, that's a good
Yep.
timing. So
Yep.
and the process. relatively smooth, has it? You know, going through
Yeah,
the
I suppose I found that when I was going through the interview process, there were a lot of times where I needed to make sure that I knew the kind of background of the different stamps and the different visa qualifications, because especially when I was interviewing with smaller companies who maybe hadn't seen as many international applicants, their HR teams might not have been as familiar with some of the different stamps and the qualifications. So I just had to make sure that I was very clear and could kind of explain to them, like, you know, right out of the gate of university, I'll be on this thing called a 1G. You don't need to pay for a permit for me. I will be allowed to work. And I think that really helped different companies to get more comfortable with this idea of interviewing me and taking me forward in the process, because they had a better understanding then. And since I started working, the HR team at my current company has been great and has helped me through all the processes. So I haven't had to worry since then.
That's really good. That's really good. It's really interesting to see this, and it's a great success story about seeing how the process can work. But it's about taking ownership of it and communicating clearly at all times with the various stakeholders about, so that they're not making assumptions or having to guess, which I think is the important takeaway. So
Yeah, I actually put at the bottom of my CV, will be able to work without a work permit under the stamp 1G, just so
yeah,
that it was very clear, because I think people could see from my CV that I came from the US, and there might have been that question even just looking at the CV. But with that little line just in the kind of the base of the CV, I hope that cleared things up from the get-go.
yeah, no, that's good. That's some good advice as well, just to actually state it clearly on the CV from the get-go.
Mhm.
Um, Plans for the next couple of years? Where are you thinking of going? What do you hope to achieve? My
That's a
last
great
question.
question. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I I think that there's still so much for me to explore in within this industry, and I think that kind of what I'm looking to do is to just increase my knowledge, because that's one of the things I realize is that it's almost very hard to become an expert in this industry, because things are always changing. There's always so much information. So my goal is to really just keep expanding my knowledge in a couple key areas. I'm always interested to learn more about the actual metal of the aircraft. So I think that would be some interesting knowledge to pick up, and to also just see kind of how everything plays out after this whole grand, COVID experience that we have. I think we're in for some really interesting changes within aviation, and I'll be certainly be keeping on top of that.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's actually all the questions I have. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say thank you for doing the interview this morning and sharing this information. It's been hugely helpful. I'm going to press stop now on the recording, but maybe you just stay on the line for a moment.
Absolutely.
Okay.